Girls and women suffer more from sexualization than boys and men. And when it comes to sexual violence, the perpetrator is usually a man, irrespective of the gender of the victim. Many girls are told that they did something wrong and that they should be ashamed of what happened. And even if they may not hear that from anyone, there are many who still feel this way, since we are constantly told in society that it is one's own fault if one is subjected to sexual violence. It is very important that we are extremely clear that it is never the one who has been exposed or abused that has done something wrong, regardless of the circumstances. The one who has done something wrong is the one who committed the illegal acts of violence, and this is irrespective of if alcohol, drugs, or money is involved. No matter what type of violence or action, everyone reacts differently to being subjected to violence. It is very common to be so shocked and scared that one ends up in a freeze mode and cannot react at all. So we cannot put blame on those who do not react themselves, because they often cannot. Whatever the circumstances, it is never the one who is subjected to sexualization or violence that has done anything wrong, and we must talk about that. There is so much guilt and shame attached to sexual abuse, and it makes those who already feel bad about what they have been experiencing to feel even worse, because they also blame themselves. We need to talk about this both with adults and young people, and not least with our football players. We must understand the scope and seriousness of constantly normalizing violent acts, even if they are mild. If we want to prevent and stop violence, we must all start by denouncing violence already at a mild level. We need to stop making excuses for offending comments, and also change norms that are directly destructive for the future, such as if a little boy beats a little girl and an adult says, "Oh, he's just in love with you. Boys tease when they're in love." As if it was okay to hit or tease someone because one is in love with them. What we teach boys is that it's okay to beat, and what we teach girls is that they should simply just take boys' violence and expect it, and maybe even strive for it if it is such a show of love. And this is a huge problem. As adults and role models, we cannot place this responsibility on children. They have learned from us, and they learn from what we do, not from what we say. So if we speak up ourselves, refuse to put up with, and stop violence, our children and youth will learn and do that as well when they grow up. The most important thing to remember is that you decide for yourself and your own body what you want to do with it, and no one else can control it and decide for you. If you don't want to, then you don't want to. If someone does something you don't want, then that is an act of violence. And all violent acts and all forms of sexualization are illegal. We can do a lot to prevent sexualization and violence just by talking about this as the role models we are. As role models, we can use our leadership and moral courage to stop violence and sexualization. If you see violence or sexualization occurring, or if you become aware of that it has happened, for example by one of your players telling you about an experience she has had, there are 5 things you can do. First of all, stop and denounce violence. You must always try to stop what is happening and make the people involved realize that they are acting wrongly and illegally. Sometimes it can be a situation that seems very difficult or almost impossible to stop there and then. For example, if a situation is very violent. And then you can try and call for help by, for example, calling the police. It is important that you think about your own safety so that you do not risk being exposed to the violence yourself. However, we can do a lot just by our presence. For example, if we see that a young girl is being talked to by a man in an obviously sexual way that she does not want to on the bus, then we can sit next to her or even start talking to her to show her that she has support. This is also a way to stop what is happening. But if we cannot stop what is happening when it happens, for example, if it's a situation that we do not have the power to stop in a safe way, or if we only find out afterwards, then we must be clear about that what has happened was not okay. If someone around you has been abused, you must always try to explain that what has happened is not their fault, and they have been subjected to something that no one should have experienced. Always show that something is wrong when it feels wrong, whether you can do it right away or if you can do it afterwards. Whether you do it directly or afterwards, when you may have processed what you have heard, seen, or experienced, it is very important that this is done so that those involved understand that what happened was wrong. Especially important is that the victims of abuse understand that they did not do anything wrong. Explain that abuse is abuse. Explain that what has happened is a form of abuse, a form of violence, which is both unacceptable and illegal. Remember that all violent or sexual acts against your will are wrong. And remember the scale of violence. It doesn't matter if it is mild or severe violence. Report. Always report what happened. Sometimes it can be difficult, but it is always worth reporting. If more people report what they are subjected to, eventually statistics of this type of crime will show what an incredibly big problem this is. And then it will not be possible to ignore. This requires attention and serious measures taken by our governments. If we never report, then we can never know how often it happens or how common it is. By reporting it, it also becomes a statement that the victim has not consented to what happened, and it clearly states that this was an act of violence. Unfortunately, few reports lead to prosecution, but it is nevertheless important to report it. The only way we can influence and demand prosecution and demand more severe measures to be taken is by having more accurate statistics. It can also be important for psychological reasons for the victim to make a report. You can report to the police, but you can also report to other authorities. If it happens at a school, for example, you can report to the principal. If it happens online, you can always report to the platform or website you are using. If this happens in your football club, you can report it to the board. And you can always report what happened to us, and we can help you find the right place to turn to and help you to do so. Make sure help and support is available. Explain what is happening or has happened and why it is not okay. Make sure that those who have been exposed know that there is support available, whether it is from you as a leader or any other organization. You can find organizations that work specifically with different issues and different forms of abuse and violence in your community. Or you can always contact us for support or help and to find out how to support your players. As a leader, you can play a big role for your players by creating a safe place where the player can talk about their experience. Remember our 3B model. Be near, be quiet and listen, and be there. And think about how important it is that we express our feelings in order to process them. How incredibly important it is, if one has been involved in a difficult experience, to put words to it and thereby start to process it. Follow up. Always follow up after a while with the victim of abuse. This step is very important and perhaps the most often forgotten. We need to follow up to know how the experience feels for the person who has been exposed to violence. It is not always that a difficult situation is experienced as such immediately. Everyone reacts differently, and sometimes the reaction may come later. By following up, we can ensure that the victim receives the support they need. It is also important to understand that what the person has been exposed to has actually stopped. And if it continues, we need to make sure we get assistance to help the person out of the situation or hand it over to professionals or authorities who can. We as leaders can do a lot to prevent sexualization and violence by talking about it, bringing it out into the open, and teaching our players what violence actually is and what is illegal. For example, you can draw the scale from mild to severe violence, and then the players themselves can place different things on the scale and discuss why they place things as milder and others as more serious. This is a good way to start a discussion about normalizing violence. You can also create a culture within the team that prevents violence, where you talk about how you as a team want to act if something happens during a match, for example, or at school, so that the players always back each other up and support each other. For example, standing up if someone is making a sexist joke. If we are many who stand up and say no to violence, then it is possible to make a difference. Together, we can really change and influence society positively so that we reduce the prevalence of sexualization and violence and prevent mild violence from escalating and getting more and more severe. In order for our players to feel comfortable telling us about their experiences, it is important that we show that we are there for them. Children rarely tell us when or if they have experienced abuse or violence. Each child must want to tell you about it themselves. You as a coach must be careful so that you do not ask inappropriate questions or force any answers. However, you should be attentive, responsive, and get to know your players. The better you know them, the faster you will notice if something is wrong. And through the regular check-ins at your training sessions, you can create a safe space and build trust, and continuously be aware of how your players are feeling. If you suspect that one of your players is mistreated in any way, it is important that you dare to ask them how they are and how it's going, so that you can understand what it is all about and so that you are able to act accordingly. What usually prevents leaders from acting when they feel that someone is not well or that someone might be subject to abuse is that they don't know how or what to do. Remember that you are never alone. Always dare to ask and show that you are there for your players. Rather ask too many times than too little. A good way to ask the question is to tell the child as specifically as possible why you feel worried about them. That is to say exactly what it is you have seen or heard that makes you worried. For example, I have noticed that you have come late to most training sessions the last few weeks, and it seems that you are more quiet than usual and keep to yourself. It makes me worried because I care about you, and I wonder if there is anything that has happened that you would like to talk about. As a coach, you should always listen and confirm, and never question what the child is saying. Remember how much it matters that you simply show your player that you care for them and that you are there for them.